Hi there, it's November the 18th and today we're continuing our progress through the letter of James, and we are going from chapter 1 verse 19 through to chapter 2 verse 17. James, or Yaakov, Jacob is his name as he would have been known to others and his friends. He is the brother of Jesus and he is very practical in his teaching. As we said before, he is in the tradition of wisdom, of this wisdom, Hebrew understanding of wisdom, not as a bunch of facts in your head, but actually something that has effect, something you know that has effect on your life in its outworking. That's a very Hebrew understanding of wisdom. You can't know something without it affecting the way that you live. And here James starts off addressing the whole thing of how people are to one another, how they relate to one another. He says, listen a lot, speak little, don't get angry. And he says something very interesting here early on in this reading. He says, man's anger, human anger, cannot achieve the purposes of God. That's a really key thing to remember here. Man's anger cannot achieve the purposes of God. Anger, after all, is an emotion. It's not a tool for the will of God. He says man's anger cannot achieve God's purposes. So he actually encourages us to be gentle, to be thoughtful, to be considerate, actually to put into practice the things that our faith teaches us, that the faith of Jesus teaches us. He says if we don't, we're like people who go to a mirror and look into the mirror and go away and then forget what our faces are like. We forget what we've been taught. And he says that's a foolish thing to do. But actually the perfect freedom of the law of love is to act out, is to let come out what we have been taught. And he were to do this, he says in chapter 2, coming into chapter 2, without favoritism. And he gives this picture here of the poor person who comes into the assembly poorly dressed and being told to sit aside, he's not given honor, not given a place of honor, whereas someone who comes in finely dressed, well dressed, is given a place of honor. He says, don't do that. That kind of thing has no place among you. This is favoring the rich, and actually it's not what God does, because God actually favors the poor. God has this option for the poor that we hear a lot about these days, and therefore he isn't acting according to this royal law of King Jesus. He isn't acting according to this love of Jesus that we have. And if we love one another, if we keep that royal law of love your neighbor as yourself, then we are following what Jesus says. If we show favoritism, if we, particularly when it comes to riches and poverty, then we are going against what Jesus has said. He reminds his readers actually that you have to keep the whole law, and if you break it in one small thing, you've broken the whole law itself. And mercy, however, triumphs over judgment. Mercy, he says, triumphs over wrongdoing. So if we come to God, if we confess our sins, if we turn around and if we act rightly, then that is the way to do it. Because Jacob says, if we say we have faith, if we say we believe, but actually that doesn't result in an outward flowing, then what use is our faith? What use is our belief? It has no evidence with it. And he's particularly saying if a brother or sister is without food, without clothing, and we just say to them, there, bless you, go away, have a nice time, but we don't take action to alleviate their suffering, then really our faith is empty, our faith is vain. As I say, Jacob has a very strong practical outworking of faith in line here. He's a Jewish brother writing to Jews. He's writing in a Jewish tradition, and it's a Jewish tradition that flows out of the love of Jesus and his very practical approach to the needs of others. So let us today hear James's words, and let's take them to heart, and let us be sure that our faith is resulting in the kind of works. It's not about earning God's favour. We have God's favour. We have God's pardon. We have God's salvation. But if we're trusting him, our faith should be flowing out into the kind of life that Jesus has already made known among us by his life in us. Have a very good November 18th.